and everyone else.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, well, good evening, everybody. My name's Bob Sewell. I'm president of the Houston Archaeological Society, and welcome to the October 2025 meeting of HAS. Our speaker this evening is a lifetime HAS member and friend, Dr. Greg Dimmick. Dr. Dimmick, will discuss his latest book about the Texas Revolution, Santa Anna's Army in the Texas Revolution, 1835, published by Texas A&M, meticulously researched in museum and library archives of Texas and Mexico. Going so far as to teach himself Old Spanish, which before standardization often used several variations of the same word within a single manuscript. The book presents new perspectives on the revolts taking place in the Texas colonies, as well as several discontinued Mexican states, raising political challenges for Santa Anna and other Mexican leaders. Dr. Dimmick practiced pediatrics at South Texas Medical Clinic in Wharton, Texas for 37 years until his retirement. He's a graduate of Texas A&M University and the University of Nebraska Medical School. As an avocational archaeologist, Dr. Dimmick co-authored 2 archaeological reports in collaboration with HAS about excavations related to the movements of the Mexican Army after April 11, 1836, which informed his 2000 book, Sea of Mud, The Retreat of the Mexican Army After San Jacinto. A 2000 winner of the San Antonio Conservation Society's Publications Award. Dr. Dimmick also edited several Vicente Villasola's analyses of Jose Urrea's military diary, a forgotten 1830 publication by an eyewitness to the Texas Revolution. He has lectured across the state, has appeared on the Discovery and History channels, and served as chair of the Archaeology Committee of the San Jacinto Battleground Association. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Greg Dimmick. Over to you, Greg.
Thank you. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, a little bit choppy, but never mind.
Okay. First of all, this is a little different type of archaeology. I call it archival archaeology because most of the stuff I'm going to be talking about is documents. But before we get into that, I did want to show you a nice artifact from the Sea of Mud here in Wharton County. I found this in a field that I had probably been in at least 10 or 15 times, and I stumbled across this. This is a chest plate, and you can see it says Jimenez on it. And the chest plate's about 2 inches wide and about 3.5 inches long. And it went on their chest to hold their leather straps in place. They had 2 leather straps. And this is what it went on their chest. It's called a chest plate or a breastplate. The Jimenez Battalion was one of only 2 battalions that fought at the Alamo, and they fought at Goliad against famine. There were only 2 Mexican battalions that fought at both places. So the soldier that dropped this in the Sea of Mud from the Jimenez Battalion, he fought at the Alamo, and he also fought at Goliad. So it's a rare treasure to me. I called up the Alamo when I found this Jimenez plate, and I told them I have one just like you have. And they told me, oh, ours is a reproduction. We don't have a real one. So I have a real one. That little hole on to the right held a chain, and there was a pick and a brush attached to that chain, and that would be to clean out the fire hole in their musket. But this is a chest plate from the Jimenez Battalion. I want to tell you how in the world I decided to write this book. First of all, I guess it's probably 15 or 20 years ago, Dr. Roger Moore, who I'm sure you all know well, he sent me a link because he knew I was interested in the Mexican Army. He sent me a link for their 200th anniversary. Mexico digitalized their military archives, and they put about 200,000 documents in there. And I started going through them quickly because I was worried they wouldn't stay up. And I downloaded about 2,000 that had to do with Texas history. And I had all those documents downloaded, and I finally, they're almost all of them are handwritten in Spanish. I finally decided that I needed to write a book about these documents because a lot of these documents have never been seen before. They're very rare and unusual documents. They aren't all from that source. I used multiple other sources. I went and did research in Austin, and I did research in Galveston and Richmond and Rosenberg. So I have a lot of documents in here. When I talked to A&M University Press, I had so much information. They told me, well, you should probably do 2 volumes. And then when I started writing it, it turned out that I was probably going to need to do 3 volumes. So volume 1 to me is one of the more very interesting because there's not much documented about what happened in 1835. It's everybody usually starts at the Alamo and then they go to San Jacinto. Sometimes they throw in Goliad. Volume 2 is going to be 1836 through the Alamo and the Battle of Perdido. In respect to the Mexican Army, I wrote the Battle of Perdido. The Texans called it Calado Creek, the Battle of Calado Creek, but the Mexicans called it Perdido. And then volume 3 is going to be the Battle of San Jacinto and the aftermath. Now, there's a lot more in there than just these battles. There's a lot of documents. I've got chapters on naval history. I've got chapters on the medical things that went on in the Mexican Army, their medicine, what doctors they had, this kind of stuff. I've got one chapter that I called the American Invasion of Texas, and I've documented a lot of stuff about the Americans coming into Texas. So anyway, I took these documents. I probably used about 200 of them in the 3 volumes. Now, they aren't just a list of documents. This is a narrative. I tell the story, and then I add the documents in. We obviously translated them from handwritten Spanish. We translated. I did a rough translation on all of them, and then John Wheat at the University of Texas did the final translation. These are the different sources that I used. The Archivo Histórico Militar is what Dr. Moore sent me. It's interesting. The site is still up there, but they've disabled the search engine. So you can't really search for what you want to. I would search the Alamo, San Jacinto, that kind of stuff. But now they disabled the search engine. So I'm glad I got all the documents down that I could. I used documents from the University of Texas, the Archivo General de la Nación, a lot of Mexican sources, Filosola, Urrea de la Peña, Sanchez Navarro, Juan Sanchez Navarro. There's a lot of different Mexican sources, and I use those. I tried my best not to use Texan or American sources because I wanted to tell the story from the Mexican Army viewpoint. Now, there are a rare exception of Texas documents, but only the ones that I found in the Mexican archives. If I found them in the Mexican archives, my assumption was that influenced the thinking of the Mexicans. Before I get into the documents, I want to say something about the Mexican army, and that is their story has really not been told. And the documentation has not been researched until I did it. And there's so much that isn't known about the Mexican army. And if you read the Texas history books, they're not very accurate when it comes to the Mexican army. I use one example always to tell how inaccurate the Texas history books are about the Mexican army, and that is I ask people, I say, how many Mexican soldiers died at the Alamo on March 6th? Okay. Or on, on March 6th, 1836. And the Texas history books, the lowest number I can find is 500 of them have died. And my volume 2 is going to include all this information. But there was a general who made a list, and he wrote every unit commander, and the commanders sent them a list of their dead and wounded, and he compiled it together. And the list is a total Mexican soldiers killed on that day of 62. And there were 290 wounded, and a lot of them died. Don't get me wrong, but 62 dead and 290 wounded is not very close to 500 dead. I've seen some documents that say 2,000 Mexican soldiers died on that day, but they weren't even 2,000 attacked the Alamo. And once again, I've got that well documented. I'm going to start showing you documents just from volume 1. And the first thing I found, I was very impressed. I found it in the newspaper El Telegrafo, dated December 30th, 1833. And this is Stephen F. Austin's letter to the city council, the Ayuntamiento of Behar. He wrote them on October 2nd, 1833. And in his letter, he said, we're not going to be able, I'm sorry, I should have been gone forward. He said in his letter, he said, we're not going to be able to become a free state. That's why he went down there, was to separate Texas from Coahuila. He said, but go ahead and set up governments anyway. Go ahead and set up your city councils. Go ahead and set up the government. And basically he told them, just act like we're independent. And he wrote that. And then I found the response of the city council, and they sent this back to him on October 31st. This is the response sent by the city council. And I think it's fascinating. He said, this corporate body neither can nor should, nor even wishes to follow the aforementioned suggestions, setting up all these governments. It begs that you stop writing to it regarding this matter. As you well know, that these communications compromise the obeying of the orders and the laws of the state that must be obeyed. And of course, there's more, but that to me was the heart of it. It said, don't write about this. But anyway, by the time that they sent this, Austin had already left Mexico City and was making his way back to Texas. But the city council not only sent, they sent this letter to Austin, they sent a copy of his original letter, and they sent a copy of their response to the government of Mexico. And as soon as they got that, they intercepted Austin and arrested him, and he spent a couple of years in prison in Mexico for writing this. I have another fascinating document. In my mind, it's fascinating. And this I was trying to get into the mind of the Mexicans. You know, the Mexicans considered themselves very generous. They were giving land to the Texans. They were putting the taxes on hold. They were doing everything they could to encourage colonists to come into Texas. And then there was all this trouble, and they were not exactly happy that these colonists, who supposedly had been treated so well, started becoming violent and demanding and everything else. This is from Captain Antonio Tenorio. He was commander at Anahuac. And this Anahuac, of course, was one of the first confrontations that the Texans confronted the Mexican soldiers. And this is May 4th, 1835. And he said, "I beg your excellency," this is Cos, by the way. Cos was the commander of the eastern states of Mexico. Everybody says Cos was Santa Anna's brother-in-law. I'm 98% sure that he was not, from all the research I've done. Anyway, I beg your excellency that if an expedition is formed with the purpose of punishing and subduing the pride of these colonists, send me, even if it is in the class of a simple soldier, for I have the greatest desire to battle these true enemies of the fatherland. I like to tell people that the Mexican army, they weren't bad guys. They were trying to save Texas from Mexico. I always use the analogy that if a bunch of Canadians in Minnesota started an uprising and we sent the Texas National Guard up to help put down the uprising, they would not be bad guys. They were just trying to save Minnesota for the United States. And so they were trying to save Texas. They weren't evil or bad or anything like that. They were just trying to do their job. The more I read about the Mexican army, I'm impressed with how brave they were, how tough they were. The conditions they marched through coming to Texas were just terrible. They got hit by a blizzard. Some of them died of thirst, died of hunger. They were being attacked by Native Americans. It was like they were tough to make that trip. Manuel Hinojosa, my good friend and illustrator for my book, made this drawing for me, and it's going to be in the book, the volume 1. This is Captain Antonio Tenorio meeting with William Barrett Travis. They met in a thicket near Anahuac to discuss the terms of capitulation. The Mexican army capitulated on June 27th, 1835. And then I found a copy of Tenorio's report of the conflict at Anahuac. I found a copy of that dated July 7th, 1835, and we've got that translated and in the book. By the way, I should tell you there are a lot more documents than what I'm giving you here. This is the tip of the iceberg. This is, to me, some of the most important stuff. Now, there's several other things that I found. I found the contents of the 5 documents that were captured from a Mexican courier on June 21st, 1835, near San Felipe. And this was, in those 5 documents, they found out that a Mexican army was marching to Texas. And I think that's what really blew things up. The Mexican army was coming to Texas. And they weren't going to have any of that. The Texans weren't. Don't get me wrong, I'm not an apologist. I don't think the Texans were terrible and evil or anything like that. I just think it was 2 sides that both believed in what they were fighting for. I found another long letter written by Santa Anna to Tornell. Tornell was Secretary of War. And the date was October 26, 1835. And in this letter, he detailed the actions that needed to be taken to regain control of Texas. By the way, AHM is Archivo Histórico Militar. That's the source. Then I found another document dated November 11th, 1835. This was from Vital Fernandez to Tornell. Vital Fernandez was the commander at Matamoros. And he wrote and he wanted all these different uniform pieces and he wanted all this different cloth. And I put that in there because I thought the reenactors would love that. There was a lot of detail about the uniforms and what they were to be made of and that kind of stuff. This is a very interesting document to me. This is from the commander at Oaxaca, and he wrote a circular, just a letter to the troops. And to me, once again, you're getting at the heart of the Mexicans' opinion about what was going on in Texas. Uh, they were not happy about this, and this is a good example of that. Soldiers, a miserable portion of adventurers and hypocrite settlers in Texas have dared to set foot hostilely in some of the towns of that territory. In these towns, the magnanimous Mexican nation with liberal hands gave hospitality to those same monsters that today attempt to subjugate it and usurp one of the richest parts of its ground. I think that we need to understand the feelings of the Mexicans when this was all going on. And I think this is a good example of how hurt they were that the settlers who had been well treated and invited in, and they all became Mexican citizens. They swore citizenship to Mexico and they swore to obey the laws, but they didn't necessarily do it. This is another interesting thing that I found. A lot of people say there were Congreve rockets fired at the Alamo. And I found this document that 100 of these Congreve rockets from England that were made in England were to be sent to the Army. And before they did that, they decided to have a committee that evaluated if they were effective or not. And in that document, they said the results were that the first rocket, when it exited the tube, was placed, it left its trajectory because of the elevation that it was given. While in the air, it burned with such a fast velocity that it's finished its course at a distance of 20 varas. So that's about a little less than 60 feet. So it didn't hardly go anywhere at all. He said the same happened to the second rocket. The third advanced up to 50 varas, which is still only 150 feet or so. But none of the three grenades which were in their heads exploded. So none of the rockets exploded. And one had its tail broken off, and the tubes of all three were destroyed. So my impression, and they didn't specifically say that, but my impression is after testing them, they decided not to send them. So I don't believe that there were Congreve rockets fired at the Alamo. I found some other interesting historical documents that were written by three guys that were in the Navy, and they were in the Mexican Navy. Morris, I'm sorry that I can't see the top of it anyway. There were three guys in the Mexican Navy, and two of them were Texans and serving with Captain Tommy Thompson. He was the commander of the Mexican ship Correo de Mexico. And then Jimenez was a Mexican sailor, and all three of these guys escaped capture, the capture of the Correo. The Correo was captured by the Texans, and they ended up taking it to New Orleans and putting the crew in prison and having a trial there. And these three managed to get back to Brazos de Santiago, which is the port of Matamoros. And the capture of the Correo by the Texan ship San Felipe and Laura, I think Laura was a steamship, was interesting because when this naval battle took place, after that, I found a document that said this is one of the reasons, this action is one of the reasons that they need to go get the come and take it cannon from Gonzales. Interestingly enough, Austin was on board the San Felipe, but he had disembarked before this action took place. But anyway, this action was one of the reasons the Mexicans felt like they needed to go get the come and take it cannon. This is one of my favorite documents. I found this myself. I was at the Benson Hispanic Library in Austin, and I was going through just folders and folders of old documents. And I stumbled across this document, and I noticed that it was signed by Castaneda. And I said, wait a minute, I know that name. Castaneda was the commander of the Mexican cavalry at the Battle of Gonzales. And then I looked and saw the date, and it was October 2nd, 1835. That was the day of the Battle of Gonzales. So that afternoon, after the battle was over, Castaneda wrote Ugartecha, who was the commander in San Antonio in Behar. And it was very interesting to me because I've done a lot of research on the twin sisters. I'm not particularly popular in Gonzales because of all the research I've done. And he said in this document, today at 5 in the morning, I was attacked at the habitation, I'm trying to do it in Spanish, of La Pera by 200 Americans, more or less. And he said in this document, they had one medium piece, which is a cannon, a medium-sized piece, and a small piece of ordnance, which they call esmeril. I wasn't familiar with that term. I had to look it up in an 1835 Spanish English dictionary, but I found it. And so to me, it's along with a lot of other documentation, which I'm going to put in the book, there's not much doubt that the come and take it cannon was not that little bitty cannon that they have at Gonzales. That was almost for sure the small piece of ordnance. It was at the battle, but it wasn't the come and take it cannon. It wasn't the one the Texans or the Mexicans were after. They captured a cannon, which is reportedly a 6-pounder. I've got good documentation that it was. And they captured that, and it was almost for sure used at the Alamo. Okay. I found another document. Oops, sorry. One of them is from Cos. By this time, Cos has gone to San Antonio, Behar, and he wrote Santa Ana about how things are going in Texas. And he said they're not going well. And he said, if you don't send me 2,000 men right away, they might lose Texas. And then I found a lot of documents regarding the taking of Goliad by the Texans on October 9th and 10th. That's a fascinating incident that happened there. I won't get into that. November 5th, I found a document from the military commander at Fort Lipan, Titlan, Lieutenant Nicholas Rodriguez. That's on the Nueces River. I've actually done some archaeology there with the Texas Historical Society. And we found a few things where the fort was. But anyway, Rodriguez was ordered to go reconnoiter Goliad, and he did so. And then on his way back, he was attacked by the Texans, and they captured Fort Lipan Titlan, which was one of the Mexican Army posts that no longer was in Mexican Army control. I found another thing that was very interesting, and this is one of the documents that I used from the Texans. This is Austin to Ugartecha, and it's dated September 15th, 1836. Austin is now out of prison and he's back in San Felipe. And he's talking about these Mexican troops marching to Texas. I can't see the first line on my computer, but he said, well, how about these measures? Honey in the mouth and daggers in the hand? My friend, I do not think that this is the way to deal with the people. It is my duty on behalf of openness to say that public opinion will consider the march of troops into the colonies in the present circumstances as a declaration of war, and that neither I nor anyone else can prevent the consequences. So this is Austin's, after that courier was captured near San Felipe, he's writing to Ugarteche, the commander in Behar, and he's telling him, don't send troops or we're going to have big time trouble. We won't be able to stop it. And he was right. I have several documents about the siege of Behar. And one of the battles at the siege of Behar was the Battle of Concepcion, which was a mission. And there was a Colonel Ugartecha, who I have pretty much shown that he was the brother of Domingo Ugartecha, who was the commander at Behar. This is his brother. He was the cavalry commander. And I've got his battle report on the Battle of Concepcion, dated October 28th, 1835. I've got a battle report from Concepcion by Lieutenant Colonel Jose Maria Mendoza, who was an infantry officer on Costa's staff. And that's also dated October 28th. And then I've got Costa's battle report on the Battle of Concepcion. The Mexicans were very good about documenting everything. They would write everything down and they would send a copy to the Secretary of War. So all these documents were copied and sent to the Secretary of War. So we've got all this information. I don't know how much y'all know about the Battle of Concepcion, but the Mexicans were driven off away from the mission and they lost a cannon there. So the Texans captured a cannon from the Mexicans. This is from the commander of the Morelos Battalion. This is Nicholas Condell. And this is from the Battle of Concepcion, the Morelos Battalion was involved. Interestingly enough, they were the only regular Army unit. All the rest were Presidial battalions. But this was the regular Army unit, the Morelos Battalion, which, by the way, we found two Morelos Battalion chest plates in the Sea of Mud. But anyway, there were two lists, and this one is very interesting. It's the names of the dead and captured from the Morelos Battalion at the Battle of Concepcion. And when I started writing this, I thought to myself, I need to put as many names in there as I can. Genealogists are going to be interested, relatives are going to be interested. So I tried to make sure to always put their names in there, just not show the list. This is another illustration by Manuel Hinojosa. And this is the Battle of Concepcion. You can see the mission in the background. You can see the cannon that the Mexican soldiers eventually lost. But Manuel's an excellent illustrator, and I love this picture. Okay, 1836, technically this is not an 1835 document, but on January 14th, 1836, Sanchez gave a list of the names of the dead and wounded from 7 of the Presidio companies that fought at Behar in the siege of Behar. They left Behar on December 13th. They surrendered and left Behar on December 13th. five of the Presidio companies didn't get a report. So we only have the dead and wounded from 7 of the 12 companies. I found another interesting document dated December 13th, the day they surrendered, from Barragan to Santa Ana. And that's a report from the commander of the Presidio Company of Rio Grande. And he gives details about what was going on during the siege and why he and his company left Behar. I wouldn't say they deserted, because they went back to Laredo and reported to the military post there. But he tells Santa Ana why they left. I've got that in the documentation. And then I've got another dated the same day from Galan. He was the commander of the Agua Verde Company, and they left as well. So the Mexican army had 2 or 3 companies, or battalions, I should say, that left San Antonio. So that really weakened them. That's probably one of the reasons that Coast surrendered. This was interesting to me. After Coast left, his troops went to Laredo. And then there was some reinforcements commanded by Juan Sanchez Navarro, who met him at Laredo. They were supposed to go to Behar, but Coast had already surrendered and was at Laredo. And Sanchez Navarro wrote this. He said, "A few braggarts claimed that the Dolores Regiment alone was sufficient to defeat the colonists." Sanchez's response was, "Oh, I'm sorry, I messed up. My brain didn't work as well anymore." Sanchez Navarro was actually there at Behar. He was the commander of the reinforcements that had already gotten there to San Antonio. But anyway, so he was there during the siege. And he said that Sanchez's response was, "How foolish. General Sesma claimed that with 100 Lancers, he could remove the colonists." Sanchez replied to him, "God, I hope so, but I doubt it." Sanchez had seen the spirit of the Texans. And so I think he was pretty realistic about how tough it was going to be to defeat them. Okay. Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, Greg, while you were talking, I was looking.
It's supposed to be out November 6th, but they've been telling me for a long time that it's almost out. So, but I'm actually believing this because the book's at the printer, and I've got a copy of the cover that, which, by the way, Manuel drew me a picture of a soldier from the Morelos Battalion, and that's what's on the cover.
So Greg, it's Bob here.
Yeah.
Did you have to go and research these documents in Mexico, or how many of them, or percentage of them, were actually here in Texas?
I found a few documents in Mexico, but only on the border. I didn't go into Mexico City because they had put them on that site to celebrate their 200th anniversary. So they put like 200,000 documents, and I went through those documents and I took out any of them that had to do with Texas. Luckily, I spoke Spanish when I first started getting documents to write my book on the Sea of Mud. I started slowly learning Spanish, and that really helped me in my pediatric practice because I had a lot of Spanish-speaking patients, and I got pretty good at discussing medicine. I couldn't have discussed banking or politics or anything, but I was pretty good at discussing medicine.
But pretty much most of them were downloaded. You were able to download them from a website.
Yes.
rather than
Yes.
actually go and see them in person, as it were.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Oh, cool. Okay.
And Greg, in
like I said,
Austin, where
I
were you
downloaded about.
doing most of your research at?
I'm sorry, what?
In Austin, where were you doing most of your research at for
At the Dolph
documentation?
Briscoe, at the Dolph Briscoe Library and at the Benson Library. And I did a little bit of research at the, oh, now I'm blocking on the name. There was there's museum of, there's a museum there that has archives. And I went there once or twice. But I did quite a bit of like, the Galveston has a lot of interesting documents. Riffin Rosenberg has some really good documents.
I was going to ask if you'd been down there when we were working at uh, Samuel May Williams site near San Felipe, the
Right.
landowner to research her book. That's where all the Samuel May Williams documentation is. His daughter in the 1920s took a sea chest down there with 4,000
Yeah.
items in it, and it's all down there. So I got a membership online and was just kind of scrolling through there. It's interesting to read a lot of that stuff. It really is. Yeah.
There's some great stuff in his papers. Very interesting.
Now, how long has it taken you to come up with all this research? It must have been ages, years.
I would say it took me 2 or 3 years, and then I ended up. It probably took me 2 years to write the 3 volumes.
Okay.
But that's been over 5 years ago, and they still don't have it published. So
Okay, so the first
I
volume
think
is,
we're
is
getting
due out.
close.
The first volume is due out early next year, right? Did I get that right?
Suppose hopefully November 6th.
Oh, okay. Are there any
Yeah.
dates for the next two?
No, we're already working on volume 2.
Okay. Okay. So
And
November.
wait too long. I think once we get volume 1 out, I think that'll get things rolling pretty well.
Okay. Cool. Well, are there any
So
other questions
that's
from anybody?
archival archaeology.
I
Digging
was going
through
to
the
tell you, Greg, that while you were talking, I pulled up Wikipedia real quick and put in Alamo casualties. You'd be surprised. They actually have your numbers in there kind of close to it. They said
Really?
it's widely disputed, the Texas version and the Mexican version, but it did actually say, I think like possibly 60 dead, 250 to 300 wounded, somewhere around in that neighborhood. So
One of my pieces of evidence is we have the San Luis Battalion daily log, and they were at the Battle of the Alamo. They were the Jimenez and the San Luis were the other battalion that fought also at Goliad. But anyway, in their daily log, they wrote the names of the dead and wounded, and it exactly matches that general's numbers. The general that wrote 62 dead, the names, and I don't see a daily log of a battalion leaving out names of their dead and wounded to try to make Santa Ana look good. And that's the argument for some Texas historians is, oh, they were just trying to make Santa Ana look good. It's like there's too much documentation that list was right.
The truth. Yeah.
De La Pena said it was the most accurate numbers. Philisola quoted it, and they documented that it was after reports from the individual units that he used to make that list. And
on
it
a
makes
different
sense
subject,
because
Not a different
go
subject.
ahead.
not a different subject, but at San Jacinto, do you know if there was a big discrepancy there on the casualties also, or?
No, I think that was pretty accurate. I think
Okay.
the casualties there are fairly accurate. I think Sam Houston gave some good numbers. Of course, there were so many killed, it was hard to know exactly. But I've done the research and I've taken each unit, and we have their unit strengths and that kind of stuff, and it all fits pretty well. But we do have unit roll calls that were at the Alamo later on, and they don't show massive numbers missing. They don't, they have less men, but not near as many less as you would have to have 500 dead and 1,000 wounded and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But one of the things that happened is in the 1860s, they decided to give compensation to anybody that was at the Alamo, and all of a sudden, all the Hispanics that lived in San Antonio, they were all at the Alamo, and
I
they
was
were
there.
trying to.
I was there.
Huh? Oh, you were
I
there?
was there. Yeah, absolutely.
and they were trying to make themselves look good. So a lot of them put 1,500 Mexicans were killed, or 2,000 Mexicans were killed, or something. But they had a superior motive for building up the numbers and trying to make the Texans look good.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's kind of like the Kennedy assassination. If you ask everybody who was on Dealey Plaza, you could probably fill a stadium. How many people were there?
Yeah. You've been everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, unless there's any more questions, I guess we're at the point of wrapping up this evening. Greg, it's been fascinating, Greg. You must have, the research has been wonderful, as always, with you. And we look forward to hearing from you again in the future on the progress of your second volume of all this.
There's a lot of those Spanish archives that really do need translated, the way I understand it. And kudos to you for.
It's amazing. It's amazing for me to find the battle report from the Battle of Gonzales in a folder at the Benson Library. It's like nobody's really done their research. Nobody's gone through all those.
Yeah, there's a lot. I wish I could read the Spanish and translate it.
You can teach yourself. I did.
Okay, I think we're at the end now. Thank you very much, Greg. I wish everyone a very pleasant evening.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.